So in this video, I want to talk about the deep dive series because I have enjoyed making these videos so much. They have honestly renewed my passion for Bionicle in a lot of really fun ways. I'll talk about that here in a second. Bear with me though for this video. I do have some pretty severe dry mouth. I have a vitamin C drop in my mouth to help with that, but I might talk a little bit slower just because it's, got some water and stuff. Anyway, stay hydrated. So, in a nutshell, the Deep Dive series is a series that I started to sort of peel back the layers of the original design of Bionicle from the perspective of battle, right? Of the mask game specifically. But as the series has gone on and as I've been able to identify different decisions made, I think it's appropriate to continue the series further after the end of that mask game. The mask game, in a nutshell, kind of started to dwindle down, started to get pulled back in 2003. I'll talk about why here in a moment. And by 2004, it was all but absent, really. Yeah, you had the Metro Matoran, which had the older style of masks, but they didn't really have any way to clash with each other. So, outside of that, my thought right now is that I want to further look at LEGO's strategy going from masks, Krata as collectibles designed to be a visual indicator of when a character was defeated when battling, right? To shifting towards projectiles, right? Kanoka discs in 2004 and Rotuka in 2005, etc. And how all of this stuff sort of exists alongside toys that were popular at the time, what these were sort of answers for. Because, as we all know, or might know, Bionicle essentially was LEGO's response to two fandoms. Star Wars, with its renaissance in the early 2000s with the prequel series, and Pokemon, which was massively influential and completely unavoidable in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was the toy franchise to kill all toy franchises, right? And Bionicle did something uniquely special in that it didn't try to copy either thing. It tried to play to the strengths of both, but where I can point to other toys that blatantly copied Pokemon, other franchises that blatantly copied Pokemon, and I can point to other franchises that blatantly copied Bionicle and its success. I can't name quite as many franchises that tried to respond to Pokemon and the mania that surrounded it in a way that was as, I want to say, as quintessentially branded as Bionicle was. I know that there are a lot of people out there who will, sometimes as a meme say Bionicle is not real Lego or whatever. But like, in essence, it is. It may not be the Lego bricks you knew and loved growing up, but fundamentally, even outside of a brand, they are Lego. And the success of them was not guaranteed. It was based on a lot of risks that Lego had to take. And in a lot of ways, it was lightning in a bottle. One of the reasons 2015 never really could have reached the heights of 2001 Bionicle is that it wasn't an answer to anything but Bionicle, right? It was always going to be standing in the shadow of its former self, where Bionicle held its own against Pokemon, if only for a short time, and not to the same degree as Pokemon. Pokemon was still widely more popular, but Bionicle, 2001, everybody had them. They were everywhere. 2015 didn't exist in an environment like that. That environment didn't exist. Maybe the closest we got was 2017 with like Pokemon Go and the sort of resurgence that gave Pokemon. But there haven't been that many franchises that have been able to do what Pokemon did in the late 90s and early 2000s. Even when Pokemon Go obviously came back out, right? It helped bring light back to Pokemon, but it was never as big as it was way back then. Point being, though, that Bionicle, for all intents and purposes, is a toy that evolved through its concept, even throughout its history, right? Focusing heavily on its atmosphere in the beginning and sort of the novelty of mystery in the beginning, pairing that with this simplicity in a building language that was relatively easy to understand and easy to implement in your own mocks. I've seen many people build their own, maybe not always perfect. I know my early mocks weren't perfect, but their own, versions of Toa or Borac or some amalgamous thing made of Lego pieces. Yeah, we've seen that. The Rahi Beast book is an example of that exact thing. Some of the best. But in a nutshell, Bionicle was a product that had to evolve, that had to change in order to be sustainable. And why do I say that? In 2001, Bionicle had to take a risk. Lego needed it. Like, they needed it to succeed. If Bionicle did not succeed in 2001, I don't know that today we live in a world where Lego is still a company. Or if they were, they're definitely not the size they are today. Because Bionicle was a springboard for them in a lot of ways. It showed that this was a toy that could be serious. Again, I'll get into that in a separate video. But also, that risk was not sustainable. Because, as I talk about in the first video of this series, really the first couple of videos in this series, I talk specifically about how Bionicle, the approach to the mask game, is so intertwined with the design of these toys that 2002's only real way of standing out, of improving on what came before, was to completely subvert that approach, right? 2001 was the Bionicle mask game. 2002 was, okay, now let's create a toy that destroys the Bionicle game. That was the intention. That was the purpose. That was the whole thing. Because it was to essentially replace it. So people felt like they needed to buy the new product. It's perfect marketing, to be honest. 2003, though, where do you go from there? How do you make something even more impervious than the Borac, right? As a toy. At some point, the novelty of that new, better power creep wears off. So why keep it? The Rockshi, in a lot of ways, take a step back. And I made an analogy last night when I couldn't sleep, comparing it to baseball. I am not a sports guy. I'm going to get some of this wrong. But I compared 2001 Bionicle to a really good first inning in baseball, right? You've loaded all the bases. 2002 is when you hit that grand slam, when you knock it out of the park. And the feeling that follows that, such an early success in the long game, gives you this feeling of security. Like, okay, we can pull back the reins a little bit, right? We don't have to play quite so hard now. We're well ahead of the opponent, of the competition, and we can play it safe, right? Baseball, it makes sense strategically because you don't want your players getting hurt. And if you have them exerting for the entire game, that's more risk on the players, sure. Other sports, again, you can insert the same kind of logic in those too. The analogy obviously breaks down at some point. Bionicle is not the equivalent of baseball, or any sport for that matter. But the point I'm trying to make is that 2003 didn't need to participate in the mass game, to be honest. It wasn't its job anymore. The risk had already been done. Lego reaped the benefits. 2001, Bionicle was hugely popular, hugely successful, sold millions of units. 2002, the same thing was true. So, at this point, Bionicle had cemented itself as a powerhouse for Lego. So they didn't need it to be about that game anymore. They didn't need it to be a direct response to something like Star Wars or something like Pokemon anymore. Now they needed it to carry itself. And I think 2003 did that pretty well. The Borac Cow, for all intents and purposes, I know that I harp on them in the video where I talk about the jaw lock build that I made, but this is just a mock at the end of the day, right? It has its issues, sure. But I don't hate the Borac Cow. I hope I didn't say I hate them in that video, because I would have misspoke. Because it would be disingenuous of me to hate them. Because I love the Borac design. The Borac are probably, possibly, my favorite story arc from all of Bionicle, and even potentially my favorite singular canister set. like a single Borac. Obviously, a wave of 6 of them starts to get a bit redundant, but I'm just saying, building one of them and seeing just how everything interacts is incredible. And if I were to pull all the color away from a Borac and a Borac Cow, they're fundamentally no different. So I objectively shouldn't hate one over the other. It's when I start to apply the knowledge that I know that I start to call it out for what it is, right? I call it a money grab because that's kind of what it is, but that's what it needed to be. The Borac Cow were just status quo so that the budget that otherwise would have went into 2 waves in Bionicle 2003 could all be focused and all be shifted on the Rockshi sets. And even the Rockshi sets, although developing a lot of new parts, used a lot of those new parts in the same colors, reducing budget further by not having those recolors out there. You'll notice that a lot of the recolors that come from 2003, not all, but a lot of them are actually Technic based. When you look at the Goku set and when you look at the Puku and Takua set, a lot of the recolors that come from those sets are strictly the lift arms, right? There are Bionicle recolors in 2003, but it's surprising how many of them are actually lift arms, how many of them are purely Technic pieces getting recolored. And I love that about it. It's also why I think Makoda as a Titan set was the first, what I would consider true Titan set. Where I look at something like the Exotoa and I see a humanoid statured figure, I see a Technic mass. It is a thing of beauty, by the way. If you've never built the Exotoa, the way that all of its functions kind of interact with each other and work in relation to the Toa Mata and the Toa Nuva is incredible. But Makoda is a Bionicle-based creation, not a Technic-based. Does that make sense? Like, when you look at the Exotoa, the frame of the build is almost entirely Technic. You only start really getting into the Bionicle specific pieces when you start slapping things onto it. And that's very similar to how the Rahi were designed as well. The Rahi didn't utilize a lot of Bionicle pieces structurally. They added them on after the fact as texture, as armor, as, you know, something to fit in with this world. But Makoda built a lot of his design specifically around Bionicle pieces. The Rockshi back cover and all the pieces that facilitated that, right? The Matoran torso piece from 2003, the Borac lift arm pieces and the legs, etc. It also had pieces that were slapped on too, but it felt so buttoned up for what it was. Like when I saw Makoda, it looked like, oh damn, that's what the Toa are up against, and that looks like it could win. It looked like it needed to. It wasn't overtly evil. You know, it could have just as easily been entirely black and with all these spikes and flames and dragony, demony, whatever. But it wasn't. It had its identity. And using the Rockshi parts was smart, obviously, by proposing the Rockshi as sons of Makoda, right? The Rockshi head has a lot of similarities to the Kurkan. The Kurkan also has similarities to the back cover on the Rockshi as well. And it also helped to tie the Rockshi in as sons of the Makoda in lore because it justified their use of the dark gray color, a color that was the primary, I would argue, of Makoda. I would argue his primary was dark gray and then gunmetal. But of course, that's up for debate. Makoda surprisingly subverts my expectation because when I hear about a character like that, a character of shadow, I think dark. But he's not. And I think that's what I love about him. And it also helps too because it makes him stand out from like Earth characters like Onua and Onua Nuva and Nuvok and Nuvok Cal, right? Because those are black. So seeing a character that looks gray is different. It feels different. The gunmetal was exclusive to him for the most part, with the exception of a couple Krana and things, right? So it all felt like it culminated in a perfect story arc, which, you know, was Bionicle's intention, right? It was its intention to run for 3 years, but it blew past that, of course. And then by 2004, it was Lego's time to be like, all right, let's take it in a new direction. Now, whether you agree with that direction or not, that's up to you. I have my issues with 2004 and the time that comes after it, because as I mentioned, there is a sort of novelty in mystery, in a atmosphere that doesn't explain everything to you. And 2004 is the lore dump year, essentially, of Bionicle. And I think that's to its detriment in a lot of ways, but that's just for me. Some people love Bionicle lore. They love all those nitty gritty details. So, like, I get it. It's not my thing. That's fine. The Bionicle mask game ended to give breathing room to Bionicle as a franchise through its own identity. For better or for worse, it freed up the design team to create characters rather than spend that time creating the next best thing. Because after a while, that power creep that I mentioned starts to set in, and your old toys just don't feel as good anymore. But going away from that mask game allowed those old characters to still feel special, important, like they had a place. Maybe that's just to me. I don't know. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because it does help the channel out. You can expect plenty more videos in the deep dive series going forward. I have a file on my computer where I wrote down kind of my general ideas for stories, and I want to make a long form video as well. It might be myself with somebody else. We'll see what I can do about that, and might be in a different location. Again, we'll see about that, because I think it is kind of the type of video that requires dedication. We'll see though. But that's going to be a long form video, potentially an hour or more. I've already chatted about it in other videos and on the Discord. So if you want to check out the Discord, again, linked in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, because it helps out the channel. We're 100 subscribers away from 3,000. Thank you all so much for that. And yeah, let's keep the dream alive, I guess. I hope you have a great day. And let me know in the comments your thoughts on the mask game and the direction Bionicle went in after 2003. Why not? I'll see you on the next one. Take care.